Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network, presented by our new sponsor, FanDuel. Love having them aboard with us. And joining me to talk Texans camp is Jacob Barzilla with Texans Probe. Check out his new YouTube channel. Jacob is new to the Texans content game, but I've really enjoyed his breakdowns of what he's seeing at camp. And haven't you gone to every open practice so far?
Yep.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. You keep pumping out some good material if you follow him on X, and we'll get into more of his story in a bit. But we're going to get into this Texans camp because, of course, they're at the Greenbrier in West Virginia until Thursday. But Jacob, the rumblings from everybody at camp is just pure excitement for Will Anderson. You know, is he about to make a giant leap this season? What looks different about his game?
Yeah, he's been a guy that this whole offseason, every camp he seems to make a couple plays like every day, whether it's multiple sacks or, tackles for loss. He looks quicker to me in the pass rush game. He's got some more moves. He looks like he got a little bit bendier, which is kind of hard to do, but he seems like he's done it. He looks quicker off the ball. He looks like a more polished pass rusher, to where I think he came into the league more as a really good run defender that was strong and could do things do kind of bull rush guys. I think he's developed more of a pass rush bag and, can kind of use that. He's really schooled Blake Fisher throughout all of camp. And now they have Ursary playing right tackle. And, Ursary had some wins in there, but still Will Anderson's looked pretty dominant throughout the entirety of camp. So definitely I think you're going to see kind of a leap from him. I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the running for Defensive Player of the Year as we get later on in the season.
Yeah, we're going to talk Blake Fisher definitely down the road. We're going to get to him. Everybody wondered what kind of difference a Nick Caley could make with this tight end group, considering that he's been a position group tight end coach. Are you seeing changes? Are you seeing a transformed Dalton Schultz, for example?
Yeah, I think the tight end room has looked a good amount better to me. I think they're more put in their situations to kind of excel in their roles. They really have had four guys that have played a lot at the tight end role, obviously the top three, and then Jakob Johnson's gotten in there a pretty good amount as well. Jakob's more of the straight blocker. Cade can kind of do a little of everything. Brevin's more of a, he can make stuff happen after the catch. And Schultz has had a pretty good camp, in the receiving game. I think he's had multiple plays kind of every single camp that, okay, like he makes one play here, he makes a play here, he's gotten a couple touchdowns. He's had a pretty good camp. I think the tight end room will have kind of a bounce back season. They really struggled last year. They had some injuries, and then Schultz didn't really play all that well. Cade Stover was, he was a younger guy. He was kind of thrown into a role that maybe he shouldn't have been thrown into. So I would expect the tight end room to definitely look better than they have in the past.
I don't know if you noticed, but he was quoted as saying that, there's maybe some things that he had to fix in the offseason as far as his health is concerned.
Yep.
They asked him, were you 100% last year? And, his answer was basically nobody's 100%. So basically he took accountability, but at the same time saying there was stuff going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. He definitely was dealing with some stuff. And like I said, I think there was certain situations where you just can't expect a guy who's never been a blocking tight end to go block an edge rusher or certain things like that happened for almost every guy in that room. But one of the things that, I noticed at camp and stuff was, if they're going to ask one of these tight ends to go help and block, there's always going to be multiple guys. It's never going to be, just asking Dalton Schultz to do it. There was a couple plays where they would ask Dalton Schultz and Cade Stover, or Dalton Schultz and a running back or someone. They would have multiple guys there trying to give them help. And, another thing from the Schultz presser was, I know he talked about less is more sometimes, in the, just as a whole. I think you're going to see kind of some maybe a little bit less snaps for him, more just focusing on the receiving game, less asking him to do stuff in the blocking game. And I think that's where he excels. So that's something that you should see from him probably.
Yeah, looking forward to see what these guys can do with Nick Caley, because I think that's something that for sure there's going to be a huge difference in this year. I agree with all the stuff that you're saying. The observers at camp keep saying the defense has looked way better than the offense. Not sure that's a shock considering where these two groups were at the end of last year, Jacob, but is the defense looking elite because the offense looks terrible? How concerned should we be about this offense?
I think the offense has had some pretty good days. It's been very inconsistent, though. They've had some really good days. They've had some poor days. I think the difference between the offense and the defense is there's been days where the offense has won. I think maybe The defense has won 1 or 2 more days, but it's not like it's been super dominant in that sense. I think the difference is when the defense wins, it looks really good. Like the defense has a dominant win where the offense is kind of, okay, the defense won some, but maybe the offense just won more this day. Going back to Saturday, which was, the last day in Houston until the joint practice later on, I thought the offense won the day. It was close, but I think the offense had, some really good success later on in that practice. They finished off with 8 points in the red zone. So I think the offense has had some good days. They just really have to put it together. They haven't had one day yet where it's just dominant. Like they're hitting them with big plays. They're doing this consistently, where the defense has had days like that. Today was probably the biggest example of that, where the defense just dominated the offense. But, the offense just hasn't had a day like that. And I think it's hard to expect that because I think the defense is just good on pretty much every single level. There's not like a day where, okay, maybe the secondary for the defense doesn't have a great day, but then the pass rush can go get after Stroud. So I think there's been good moments for the offense, and I think it's been better than it was last camp, because I remember going to last camp and being very concerned about the offense just not being able to really do anything, which today was kind of the first day all camp where the offense has just looked brutal, according to reports. So I think the offense has things going for them. I just think the defense is better. But I'm not overly concerned about the offense. I think the offensive line has done a pretty decent job, all things considered. I think a lot of the offensive struggles is just guys not really getting open. And Nico hasn't been super involved in camp, which was something that I noticed. They've had a lot of rotation on offense. Like they've played, 6 or 7 receivers with the first team, which, you're going to get certain matchups like Justin Watson on Derek Stingley, which we've noticed a couple of times. And that's not going to go well for the offense a lot of the time. So it's kind of tough to really put a huge judgment into that until you see them in game.
Yeah, that's great stuff. It's great stuff. I mean, I'm interested to see if we're going to see like some progression as the camp goes along, with the offense doing a little bit more. This day, the day that we're recording on Monday, not exactly a good sign of that, because they had a pretty horrendous day. But one thing I just could care less about is, oh, Davis Mills got intercepted, or Graham Mertz. I don't care about those guys.
Yeah, I don't care about that either. Yeah.
All right. According to our friends at FanDuel, let's look at the big picture for a second, because I was checking this out. The Texans are plus 2,400 to win the Super Bowl. Now, Jacob, what's very surprising to me is they have the 12th best odds and are behind the Bengals and 49ers, who both appear to be a mess, from the offseason and, everything. And the Vikings are behind them, who are starting a second-year quarterback who hasn't taken a snap. Are you surprised?
Yeah, I kind of thought this, coming into the offseason. I get the offensive line concerns. That's the biggest issue on the team. It's a big issue. It's a big concern for a lot of people. I totally get that. But to me, they have a very high floor because they're not in a very good division, and their defense is at a super high level. They have so many cornerstones. Offensively, you have a top quarterback, you have a top receiver, and you have a good running back. So to me, I'm a little surprised that they're not higher on the list, just because I think that they're going to win. They're going to be in the playoffs. To me, I think they're almost guaranteed to be. They're probably going to win the division again, but worst case, they probably end up as a wild card team. So they're going to have a shot, and they have these guys. And really, last season, you go look at it, the offensive line was brutal. I don't think the line will be that bad again. And they won 10 games. They could have won way more than that. And the Kansas City game, you go to look at the playoffs, that was a very winnable game, and they could have easily been in the AFC Championship in a year where I don't know if they're going to be worse than that. I don't see how the offense gets worse than they were last year. Like numbers wise, I think they were 21st in EPA per play and 31st in success rate. So I don't know how it's going to get much worse than that. I think success rate wise, it's just, that's more of just a down to down thing. They were just one of the worst down to down offenses in the league. They were the worst in their division. The only team that they were better than was Cleveland. So I think there's very real reasons to believe the offense will look better this season, and I think the defense on paper is better as well. So I'm a little surprised by that.
Really? I mean, if I had some dollars, I would take, it's worth like a $10 or $20 bet at least to put on the Texans for plus 2,400 to go to the Super Bowl. It doesn't take that much. The Texans, you said it, they're likely going to win the division.
Yeah.
So at least they're going to be in the playoffs. What if things come together for the offense? Because there is no doubt. I mean, you look at this defense, what they did last year, they're bringing the same guy. They should be even better. You add CJ Gardner-Johnson to this mix. Everything points to, you mentioned earlier, Will Anderson, like everything points to, with even a modicum amount of health, that, if you could put a few dollars on there, and sure, the Texans could win 2 or 3 games in the playoffs, and boom, they're in the Super Bowl.
They were so close last season when I don't think they were very good last season. There was a lot of games last season where I watched them, and even the games that they won, I'm like, this team just not very good. I mean, they really didn't play all that well, and even for that, the disappointing season, I think they were disappointed in house, obviously, because they made a lot of change. But they won 10 games. They won their division. They beat a good Chargers team in the playoffs. So I still think they're very close, and I think they're going to be better. You never know record wise how it's going to go. You never know injuries. You never know what their actual record's going to be. So they could be better on paper and still win 10 games. But to me, they're going to get in the playoffs and they're going to be a better team. So I don't really see how I don't see how they wouldn't be a little bit higher than that. I mean, they were one of the 8 teams, near the end of last season, and they really were. I mean, they were very close to being one of the last 4. So I would put them a little bit higher on that list for sure.
Yeah, we got a hit on who's the first and second favorites in the Super Bowl odds in a bit, because I just found that a little bit interesting. And we're going to hit on more camp stories, of course. But before we do, what do you listeners think about the Texans camp storylines and maybe some Texans disrespect, the stuff that we're talking about? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Look for our YouTube shorts. I'm posting shorts constantly. So if you need a quick break at work, check them out. And hey, did you miss our Friday breakdown of the Astros trade deadline? Go check it out. Carlos Correa discussion among many topics that we hit over there. Don't forget that with the Texans preseason starting a week from Saturday, I'm once again doing live Texans post-game shows. But instead of right after the games, the tentative plan is going to be live at 9 p.m. game days. That way, if you're hanging with your friends or at the game, you get a chance to live chat with us that night. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube with notifications so you can get the updates on those post-game shows. You also want to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. All right, Jacob, Cam Robinson had to leave practice Monday, so that's a story to keep an eye on for the offensive line. But I'm dying to get your thoughts on the O-line. Who's impressed you the most?
Okay, so I made a list of 3. I was thinking about this last night because it's kind of tough. Offensive line as a whole, you can kind of tell the units going, but in camp it's hard for me, depending on certain angles, to really get a look on like every player. It's hard to watch all 5. But I have 3 guys that I think have done a good job in camp and obviously have kind of won their jobs. So I'll start Arion Territory. He's done a really good job in camp. He's going against 2 of the best edge rushers in the league, and he's held his own pretty well. And, consistently after camp, he'll be out there working with Will Anderson and Titus Howard and other guys, trying to get, a feel for it. Obviously, he's playing a new position. He's never really been a right tackle. So it's an adjustment for him, but I think he's handled it really well, and I think he's going to be a good player for this team. Number 2, Jake Andrews, who's likely going to be this team starting center. He was picked up in May, so I don't think most people thought he was going to be a guy that was going to come in and start. But he's done a good job. I think the units when he was at center compared to Jarrett Patterson have just looked better for the first team. I know there was maybe some miscues from him today. Kind of an adjustment, playing somewhere else, different situation. But I think he's done a good job, and I think he's handled, the center role well. And I know he's a Cole Popovich favorite, so he definitely seems to be the favorite at that center position. And I think he will improve the run game, especially over a guy like Jarrett Patterson. And number 3, I'm going to go Jalen Thomas. I know Jalen Thomas isn't really a guy that most people have really, heard a ton about. He's not a guy that maybe all that well, but he's a guy that in college and through the NFL has played all 5 positions on the offensive line. He played center for the Ravens and the Giants a couple years ago. He played guard and tackle at SMU in college. He's a very good pass protector, and he's gotten rotated in a little bit with the first team. I don't think he's going to be a first team guy, but I think he is an awesome guy to have as a backup who can play anywhere on the line. And if a guy gets hurt, which is inevitable on the offensive line, someone's going to have an injury on the offensive line. You can plug him in at any spot. And he's done a pretty good job everywhere. He's a big guy. I think he's handled himself really well in camp, and I think he's made a case, maybe jumped over some of these guys like Ed Ingram or some of these guys that, were maybe the favorites to kind of make one of these last roster spots where D'Amico said they're going to probably keep 9 guys. He might be this 8th or 9th guy that has a ton of versatility on that line. And he's only 25.
Can you explain what you're seeing differently from Jake Andrews and Jared Patterson? I thought Jared Patterson did a great job last year keeping guys away from CJ Stroud, and the communication got better with Jared Patterson. What's the difference between those 2?
It's hard for me to necessarily tell, who's looked 100% better. I don't necessarily know. I don't have all the tape and everything, but just to me, when Jarrett Patterson would step in, in the second team, I think usually the second team drills would just look worse. Maybe the communication was a little bit different. I know the run game has looked better with Jake Andrews. Like when he's in there at center, they seem to run block better. He's a more athletic guy. He's a little bit bigger than Jarrett Patterson. Jarrett Patterson, I think, is a better pass protector. What I've been inclined to think is I would like to see Jarrett Patterson get some tries at guard. I think the communication for him is a little bit tougher than a guy like Jake Andrews, who I think Jake Andrews kind of understands the offense better. He's played in New England, which is a similar offense, and then Troy when he was with Cole Popovich. So I think maybe the communication just come a little bit easier for him. I don't think that competition is completely over, but just to me, maybe it's not necessarily like, okay, Jarrett Patterson's getting beat or one of these two is really getting beat. It's more the unit as a whole just seems to play better when one of them's at center. And I think that's been Andrew so far.
Now the other side, which O-lineman has you worried? I think I know the answer, but go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going through the list when you sent me it last night, and I really think it's just one guy. I think it's just Bleav Fisher. He's been the only guy that stood out to me as a guy that has been okay. He looks pretty bad, but I will give him credit. I think when they've put the pads on, he's looked a good amount better. He was really bad the first couple of days when they didn't have full pads on, but he has looked better. He's looked progressively a little bit better. But today was, or I guess whenever it's getting uploaded, but Monday was kind of a big tell for him when Cam Robinson does go down and they don't put him at right tackle. They slide Titus back outside and put Juice in the middle. So they're showing very little confidence in him as a whole, which is not great for a guy who's, a second round pick and a guy that I didn't think was great last season, but he wasn't awful, I didn't think either. So that's one thing that, it's not a good look for Bleav Fisher. If there's maybe another guy that's kind of played himself out of a role, I guess you could go. I don't think Patterson's been a loser because I don't think he's played poorly. I think more Andrews just looked a little bit better, but I don't think either of them have looked bad. There's really not a big loser on that line outside of him.
I would say give some patience to Bleav Fisher because tackles take longer to develop. Usually I'm glad Ursery's looking good, but tackles I remember Dwayne Brown his first year and it was ugly. So we'll see on that. There was an interesting story in the Washington Post. I don't know if Jacob caught this one where they talked to Chris Strausser.
Yep.
And Strausser had some interesting stuff to say about last season. He said, quote, "It was a combination of a lot of things. By no means Laremy Tunsil being the issue or the main issue. It was a lot of guys trying to figure out that offense. Honestly, we were not that well educated in it. So kind of shots fired at Bobby Slowik." He goes on to say, "We did have different personalities in the room. Our chemistry just was not right, but it was not all Lermy's fault." He definitely defended Lermy over and over again in this thing.
He did, yeah.
Chemistry was not right. It really wasn't. There were a lot of things going on. My fault. He did say, "I would point my finger to myself, number one." And then Jacob, he goes on to say, "The Tunsil false starts on the Texans constantly changing the snap count was an issue. So Tunsil couldn't get into a rhythm."
Yeah.
Isn't changing the snap count, Jacob, a must so you don't let the defense get into rhythm? I don't get it.
I don't know. I didn't really get that part. There was a lot of things that I think Strausser almost made both of them look worse throughout that interview. He almost said things that just made both of them look like they weren't. Because to me, you can't really make that excuse for Tunsil not knowing the snap count when he was the reason he didn't practice in camp. So maybe if you get out there in camp, you would know the snap count better and not have to deal with that. But also, I don't necessarily think that's an excuse when he was the only guy with the false start issue. So everyone else knew the cadence and knew this new snap counts, but except him. So I don't know how that works. But yeah, they definitely took shots at Slowik as well, which I thought was interesting. Slowik definitely deserves some of the blame for it, but I think a lot of that was kind of falls on Strausser as well. At some point, when the chemistry is off in the offensive line room, that's just you.
Yeah, there's some blame to go around, definitely, between both him and Slowik, for sure. Let's look at a couple more position groups. Who stood out among the wide receiver group beyond, of course, Nico?
I have two guys, and you could throw a third guy in here as well. Maybe he hasn't been a huge standout, but kind of a surprise. Jalen Knoll has looked like the best non-Nico receiver to me all camp. Like, he's looked excellent. He's played a lot with the twos, although today apparently he beat Derek Stingley on a route, so that's pretty impressive. He just looks explosive. He looks like a really smooth route runner. He's done a really good job, in and out of breaks. He catches the ball well. He really has done everything that you would want. And the other guy is Christian Kirk. Both of the two slot guys have looked really good. Christian Kirk definitely still has some juice left in the tank. I think some people were a little bit concerned about his last season in Jacksonville and some of the injuries, but to me, he still looks like a very capable second receiver. Noel probably replaces him down the line. I think I think they're pretty similar players. But as long as Kirk can stay healthy, he'll probably be the second receiver on this team, and he's done a really good job. The third guy that I would mention is Xavier Hutchinson. Not that he's had an amazing camp or anything, but I think he's locked up this kind of depth receiver spot, the fifth receiver on this team. And he's really been in with the first team a good amount, playing kind of the Z role, where maybe some people expected Higgins, and Higgins gotten in there as well, but he's kind of been in there a lot as well. Kaylee seems to like him, and he's done a good job on special teams. So he's essentially a lock to make this team as well.
All right, the running backs, you graded all of the position groups and you
Yep.
gave them your worst grade. You gave them a C. If Joe Mixon is out for any length of time, is there trouble here?
I'm a little concerned about the room. I'm optimistic that Dameon Pierce could come back and help them out a little bit. I think I do like what Dameon Pierce could potentially provide in this room. I do think Woody Marks and Jawar Jordan have done a good job. Those are the two guys that have looked like the best running backs in camp, but I'm a little concerned about Nick Chubb. I don't think Nick Chubb has a lot left in the tank. He could probably take some carries, but he's not going to give you, even 60% of what he gave you, former Nick Chubb. Like last season, Nick Chubb was one of the least efficient running backs in the NFL, and I don't think that's going to change a whole lot here. But there's some juice there. I think it's tough to have Pierce and Mixon, who I think are probably your two best just straight backs, hurt. I think a combination of Pierce, Woody, Jawar, and Chubb could hold you over till you get Mixon healthy. I think that those guys would be capable. I just don't know if they would be enough to give you like a good running game, which I think they want to be. I don't know if they have the capability to be a good running team either way. I think they're going to have to be a meh running team that can throw the ball well on offense.
Yeah, D'Amico was asked about it Monday, and he said, quote, Woody Marks has made some really nice runs. Jawar's playing fast. It shows. And Chubb, he plows behind pads, and he's going to gain yardage. I guess they hope that Chubb's just going to give you that, 2 or 3 yard run every time.
Yeah.
He's not breaking anything at this point, I guess.
Yeah. And I do think Chubb could somewhat give you that, but like I said, you're going to have to combine that with another guy. So if a Woody or Jawar has kind of the explosive plays, then if you can combine those two, kind of split the carries there, then that's a role that I think Chubb could be good in.
I want to come back to your final training camp thoughts, but we were talking earlier about FanDuel Super Bowl odds, and believe it or not, the Ravens and Bills are 1 and 2 in the Super Bowl odds, not Philly or the Chiefs.
Yeah.
So Jacob, I might get on my FanDuel app, and I'm even more sure about this than putting $10 or $20 on the Texans. I might get on there, jump on the Chiefs and Eagles. They're third and
that's
fourth.
Kind of surprising to me.
And yeah, until somebody knocks off the Chiefs, can you go against them? Come on.
I don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan of the way that Baltimore's played the last couple of seasons, but they just haven't been able to get over the hump either. I mean, at some point, and I'm a big Lamar Jackson fan, but at some point he's got to, kind of get over this hump and play better on these big games. Like you said, until someone beats Kansas City, and Buffalo doesn't seem like a team that's going to do it. They've gotten plenty of shots to do it, and at some point they just are maybe just not going to be able to get over that hump. I think Baltimore is probably the best team in the AFC on paper, but until Kansas City gets beaten, I don't know how you pick against them in the AFC. I mean, it's tough. They're pretty clearly, they're one of the best coach teams in the NFL. They have a very good offensive line. They have a good defense. They have, a top quarterback, if not the best quarterback. It's probably him or Lamar to me. And so I don't know how you pick against them, honestly.
Yeah, Mahomes is the Ravens' daddy until proven otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go back to the camp and under the radar Texans storyline. What is your under the radar Texans storyline? Anybody that we haven't mentioned that surprised you, good or bad?
Okay, yeah. So Kalen Bullock's been a guy that kind of a lot of people have talked about. He's had an extraordinary camp. He was a guy that, maybe coming after his rookie year, I wasn't as high on him as some other people. I think people were kind of pushing like for rookie of the year. I never really thought that was what he was, and that's how well he played. I thought Kamari was better than him last year. But I think the biggest thing for him is taking better angles on plays, maybe not trying to, he has the speed to go make a play, but he kind of overdoes it or maybe misses an angle. That's something that I think he's improved on a lot because in camp, he's done a really good job of taking better angles. I don't know if he's given up a catch yet. He's made a couple really nice plays in the pass game as well. He's had one INT, I think, and he could have had a couple more. So he's had a really good camp. The other guy one of the other guys that I think has had a really good camp is Miles Bryant. He's a guy that nobody really talks about because, again, second string nickel. Does anyone really care about that? But he's had a really good camp. He was the guy that stepped in for the Texans in the playoffs last season with Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward going down. And I think he's done a really good job. He had a pick six earlier in camp, and he was playing with the ones at some point because Jalen Petrie wasn't playing. So he's a guy as well that I think has done a really good job, and I think he's kind of locked himself into making this team. Braxton Berrios has done a pretty good job, in the return game, so he's made himself a case to make the team. I'm not going to say he's going to make the team, But he's made himself a case. Jakob Johnson was the guy I discussed earlier. I think he's got a 70% chance to make the team. So not a lock, but somebody that, coming into camp, I don't think people necessarily would have had on their 53. And I think he's going to make it just because I think he's essentially a tight end, but he has this type of fullback history as well. So, and he's a guy that Kaylee coached in New England. So I would say him as well. I don't know if there's been a ton of negative. I like what I've seen from a lot of the guys, honestly. I think it's been a good start to camp. And I tweeted about it today. I'm not overly concerned about this, but I think Nico Collins has had kind of a meh camp for his standards. But I don't think he had a great camp last year either. And he just goes out there in the season and he puts up 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns or whatever he had. So I'm not overly concerned about something like that. I think CJ Stroud, I know people have kind of gone on with their shoulder talk or whatever. I think he's had a good camp up to this point. He's done a really good job in the quick game. He's been pretty good under pressure. He's made some nice throws. Like I said, it's inconsistent offensively and he's part of it. But as a whole, I think, he's learning a new offense, and a lot of the turnovers that he's had, to me, like 7-on-7 turnovers and stuff like that, a lot of times he's holding the ball for 3+ seconds and he's not trying to throw it away because it's camp. You're trying to, kind of force the ball down the field, maybe make some throws that you wouldn't make in a game. And that's led to some interceptions. I'm not overly concerned about that at all.
Who besides Berrios has been returning kicks and punts?
Really, it's been a group of three. It's been him, Jalen Knoll, Christian Kirk. I don't think Christian Kirk's going to do it. So it's probably either him or Jalen Knoll. And, Dameon Pierce can do kick return as well. He's done that in the past. But punt return, I think it's those three. Berrios has, looked like, the most smooth guy. He looks like the most natural with it. But Jalen Knoll did have a big return the other day. I would still lean on Berrios getting cut and letting Jalen Knoll do it. But if Jalen Knoll continues to play so well in camp that you think he's going to play a big role in your offense, then I don't know how you would. I think you have to keep a returner at that point, because I don't think you want one of your top guys going out there and potentially getting hurt on special teams.
Yeah, that's real interesting. The Hall of Fame ceremonies were this weekend, Jacob, and it was just cool to see Andre Johnson there wearing that gold jacket, looking on at the other Hall of Famers. And, it reminded me of one of my favorite Texans camp stories. We're going to go to the archives here and hear from when ex-Texans cornerback Glover Quin joined me. Here's what he remembers from facing Dre in practice in Glover's rookie season.
When I first got to Houston, Dre was like a legend. I was on the same team with Dre, and it took me probably a month to even speak to Dre because I felt like I couldn't even speak to him. Like, man, I can't say anything to Dre right now. Me and my roommate, we used to come back to the room every day and be like, bro, did you speak to Dre today? And it was like, nah, bro, not today. You know what I'm saying? He was just that, like, he had that aura about him, but he worked, man. And, I remember lining up against him in practice, and I didn't talk any noise. And he didn't either. He just went to work and did his thing. I remember one day I caught an interception in OTAs, and I had returned it. And as I'm running back to get back on defense, Dre sticks his hand out and give me like a little low five. I went back to the sideline. I told my roommate, I'm like, bro, Dre dapped me up. I think I'm gonna speak to him today. You know what I'm saying? And that's just kind of how it was. So we basically kind of built our relationship. I didn't come in just trying to be super cool with Dre just because he was Dre and I wanted to be, say I was cool with Dre. I just wanted to come in and earn my respect. I wanted to earn my keep with all the guys, and that's just kind of how I went about my business. I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna play. I'm gonna compete. When it's between the whistles, between the lines, I gotta compete. I remember going through the draft process, and that was one thing that the coach that used to call me all the time, Perry Carter. That's one thing he used to say. When he was just kind of asking me questions about the draft and stuff, he would always say, if we bring you in, you ain't gonna be scared to compete with Andre, right? Like, you ain't gonna be scared when you line up in front of Andre. And I was just like, at the time, I'm saying whatever. No, I ain't gonna be scared. Man, I'm ready to go. You know what I'm saying? Because I wanted to get drafted or whatever. And that first day of practice, when it actually really happened, and you line up in front of Andre Johnson, you like, oh snap! All right, here we go. This Andre. I can't be scared. I can't be scared. But oh snap, this Andre.
That's some great stuff. And Glover Quin, just a fun interview. If you want to hear more of that, go to our Texans history playlist. There's J.J. Watt, Arian Foster stories as well. And Jacob, speaking of being a rookie, you're kind of a rookie in all of this Texans stuff. Tell everybody your story. You're just getting started, right?
Yep. So, okay. So originally, like I got into sports, I'll say when kind of 2014, but I was more into the Rockets for a while. I played basketball as a kid, so that was kind of my thing. I really liked the Rockets. Obviously, I still love the Rockets, but, kind of around 2020, I started transitioning to, more Texan stuff, really got into football. Around 2022, I really got into kind of covering the Texans. It was way smaller than what I do now, but I kind of got into it. And in 2023, I really started going. But it was more at that point, it was more of a kind of a fan page, like really kind of just just enjoying the fan side of it. Or, this off season, kind of last season, trying to more transition into the kind of the media stuff. We were talking about earlier, like going to U of H for kind of media and reporting type of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm trying to transition into now. That's why I was going to all the camps, trying to report on whatever I can. So that's really kind of been something. But yeah, I really got going the last, 2 years probably. I really got going with this, and I really enjoy doing it. I love like just coming on here, getting to talk with people. It's really always fun to me because I've always really been into sports, and so being able to kind of do what I love for a living is not. I mean, not yet, but kind of going towards that is something that I really enjoy.
You're about to head to U of H. Are you going to be Cougs Jacob pretty soon? Is that what's going to happen there?
No, I'm still going to cover the Texans. I'll probably do some Cougar stuff. I went to the Final Four in the championship game this year, so that was really fun. I got to do that. But obviously, I like the Cougars, but I'm going to continue with the Texans stuff. It's what I enjoy. I like the connections I have there. I've got to meet a ton of people. Got to talk with Titus Howard earlier this year. Did a stream with him, so stuff like that's always really fun.
You're at Texans Jacob. Tell everybody anything else that you want to plug for your show.
Me and my guy Drew, we do Texans Pro stuff. So as the season goes along, we kind of preview Texans game. We'll do post game stuff for later in the week where we'll go through all the Texans film and stuff. So at Texans Pro on YouTube and X, make sure you follow and subscribe to that. If you haven't followed my X, go ahead and follow that because there's always pretty good content. I try to be consistent about it, throughout game days or whatever. I'm pretty much always on there. I always get comments from people and my parents included. They're like, "Why are you always on your phone so much?" It's because I'm consistently trying to pump out the content. So I like I said, I always enjoy doing that. If y'all ever, if you ever have any questions or anything about camp, if y'all can't make it out to a camp, you can always DM me questions or whatever. Like if there's only one more left and it's a joint practice against Carolina. So I'm going to be at that one as well. So, sometimes I'll host spaces after practices, y'all can come up and ask whatever questions. So definitely try to interact with everyone and try to get everyone's opinions and stuff out there. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you're just a machine. You know this stuff really well. Just amazing how you've gotten all this info in your head at this point. And again, it's at Texans Jacob. Thanks for doing this. Appreciate the time, man.
Of course, man. Yeah, we'll have to. Maybe we'll get back on at some point in the season because I love to come back on. So anytime.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.